Hey guys, so today I am doing my presentation for the lecture video on AC/DC and the heavy metal genre in particular. So the start of the band, they were formed in 1973 in Australia by their guitarist Malcolm Young and his brother Angus. A year after the band formed, they moved to Melbourne in Australia again, and there they added their drummer Phil Rudd and their bassist Mark Evans. And then to complete the group, the band's chauffeur Bon Scott actually became their lead singer when their current vocalist refused to go on stage. And Scott cemented the band's image as brutes because he had minor criminal offenses and had been rejected by the Australian Army, so he really was the solidifier of their whole bad boy kind of don't really care about anything persona. Their lead guitarist Angus, which was one of the co-founders again of the band, was only 15 at the time, and his sister suggested that he wear a school uniform on stage, which he did, and this became his signature look. This is what he wore on stage all the time. So some background on the genre heavy metal. At the time heavy metal became popular, it was during the Vietnam War time. So American youths were very angry, and they kind of wanted something where they could be understood, and they wanted that anger to be reflected in the music that they were listening to. So they turned to heavy metal, which had an angry, piercing sound. It was very loud, because they wanted something to identify their anger with, and they wanted something that understood them. So they were angry because the Vietnam War was just needless violence, and they just didn't really get it. So students were protesting on campuses all over the country. University of California, Berkeley, Columbia, and Princeton were just a few. There were so many more. And these protests, unfortunately, soon turned violent, and students were being gassed, beaten, and sometimes even shot. The violence demonstrated that these protests by police and federal troops changed the mood of students to a dark aggression, which only made the violence escalate. More than 7.8 million university students across the country marched in protest. And actually, on December 1st, 1969, the first lottery drawing to draft men into the war was held since World War II, because since then they didn't really have a big war that they needed to get a bunch of men drafted in for. So this made the war even more personal for American youths, because their friends and stuff were being drafted, and they just became even more angry. And this is when it kind of went worldwide. So students started protesting all over the world. A few places are Paris, Italy, Britain, and Germany. Students there kind of started protesting as well, because they wanted to show their support for the American students, and they also felt that America didn't need to be in Vietnam, and it was kind of pointless. So as a result, teens turned to heavy metal and bands like AC/DC, where they felt like they were being heard and understood, and their rage was kind of being reflected in the music. So the career of AC/DC, they released their first two albums, High Voltage and TNT, in Australia in 1974 and 75. In 1976, they released their first album to the US and the UK, which was kind of a combination of the first two albums that they released in Australia. They just kind of put some songs from each into one, and that's the album that they released to us in the UK. Their album, Let There Be Rock, was their first album to chart in the US, and Cliff Williams, this is the first of many switches in the band, as we will see later when I talk about it. There was a lot of switching members in the band. Band members died, they kind of quit, like there was a lot of band member switching. So Cliff Williams came into the band soon after this Let There Be Rock album came out, and he replaced Mark Evans. And then after the release of Powerage, another album of theirs in 1978, the band's audience really expanded and their popularity really started to explode. But the real breakout was their release of the album Highway to Hell, which I'm sure we've all at least heard of because the song is insanely popular even today. And this really broke open the band's popularity. This was their first million-seller album. It hit number 17 in the US and number 8 in the UK. And then, unfortunately, tragedy struck the band. Their lead vocalist, Bon Scott, died in 1980 on February 19th, and they decided to replace Scott with a new lead singer just so they could keep going. And they replaced him with Brian Johnson, and they recorded Back in Black a month later. And again, we probably all know this album because it is so popular, one of their most popular albums, and this would actually prove to be their most best-selling album. It sold over 10 million copies in the US alone, which is really not surprising. For the next few years, AC/DC was one of the largest rock bands in the world. Again, this just expanded and expanded their popularity because this really was an amazing album. Another switch in the band, again, member switching, happened in 1983 when Rudd left the band and he was replaced by Simon Wright. And then their fashion and their look, I kind of wanted to just show you guys some pictures. They stayed pretty consistent. So you can see Angus in his school uniform in like all of these pictures. This was kind of like his look. And then you can see that the rest of the members are kind of just wearing jeans. They wore like vests and t-shirts, just really like casual. And then this was a little out there, but 70s with the bell-bottoms, velvet pants, and all that. But overall, they stayed very consistent with their look, with the jeans and vests and stuff like that. But yeah. So here are my resources, and thank you guys for watching.